All right. Let's do my thing here. I'm gonna do the warm-up, 15 minutes, and then we'll do the show. Full show tonight, fully interactive, no half-assing it. I have every light in my house around me to get this stupid camera to work, and that has not been fixed, but I can't fix that yet. So, Angela Davis. After Angela Davis, 15-minute warm-up. We will do the stream right like. And I'm going to tag that on there. And here we go. We're going to try to dual stream tonight for the first time in a while. So that might drop the stream, but that will be at midnight. Until then, we have reviews, and we're starting out with Angela Davis. Then John Misherm and Dennis Kucinich, and a few short clips.
Is it possible to help keep our online platform safe from cyber threats?
So we can better protect our customer data?
Here we go.
To say something about the need to respond to what was happening in the ghettos and the barrios. And we kept waiting. And we heard Nixon and all of his racist nonsense. And we were wondering whether or not George McGovern was going to say something about that, whether he was going to at least challenge him in words. But in a lot of ways, he was silent. He was either silent, or he went into Chicago and made a deal with Richard Daley, with the Daley Machine. And if anybody symbolizes racism in the Midwest, it's the Daley Machine. And that also meant at least implicit support for Hanrahan, who was a part of that whole slate. And we know what Hanrahan is all about. Because an official investigative commission confirmed that Hanrahan definitely had something to do with ordering the attack, which led to the murder in cold blood of Fred Hampton and Al Clark as they slept in their beds. But I think the failure of McGovern to at least verbalize a forthright challenge to racism indicates that we will indeed be facing very serious days ahead. As I said earlier, we can look back over the last 4 years as we try to predict what we're going to face these next 4 years. And what I've tried to do is to try to understand what happened in Germany prior to the Nazi seizure of power, prior to the Nazi seizure of power. And one of the things I've looked at is this judicial system prior to fascist Germany. And I noticed some very, very frightening parallels between the deterioration of the judicial system in pre-Nazi Germany. I'm stressing it, pre-Nazi Germany, before Hitler seized power. There's some very frightening parallels between what was going on there then and what is going on here now. And let's look at the Supreme Court. You see, once upon a time, there was something called the Fifth Amendment. And once upon a time, the Fifth Amendment was supposed to be one of the mainstays of democracy in this country. But the Supreme Court recently rendered a decision which virtually annuls the Fifth Amendment. Because you see, now you can't say, I refuse to testify on the grounds that it might incriminate me, especially when you're going before a grand jury, and grand juries are becoming increasingly instruments for political intelligence to find out what's going on in the movement. And you can't say, I refuse to testify on the grounds that it might incriminate me. It used to be that if they forced you to testify, they would give you immunity from prosecution. But now, according to a recent Supreme Court decision, they don't have to give you immunity from prosecution. All they have to say is that they won't use those few words that you may have said during the grand jury hearing or during the court appearance. But that isn't to say that they will go up and dig something else up, fabricate something, and charge you with the very same thing about which you're supposed to be testifying. Once upon a time, the jury system in this country was supposed to be one of the most important institutions of democracy in this country. Once upon a time. But the Supreme Court has recently ruled that you don't have to have 12 individuals totally convinced that you are guilty in order to be convicted. It can be 9, it can be 8. Have you ever seen that movie, 12 Angry Men? Where one man who believes in the innocence of the person who's on trial succeeds in convincing all 11 others that he indeed is right. But you see, this in 2 states already, this doesn't exist anymore. And I'm sure that the rest of the states are going to begin to follow suit very soon. But what does this mean in terms of this racist offensive? It means that if you have a situation where a black person or Chicano person is on trial, and you're in a county where the most you can hope for is maybe 1 or 2 or 3 blacks or Chicanos on the jury, that means that whatever input they might have will be totally canceled out. And so you remember what happened with Huey's case, how he was tried on 3 different occasions, and there were hung juries. And as a result of that, they had to dismiss the trial because the charges, it was obvious that the racism and the bias of jurors was preventing a just verdict from coming forth. But you see, that won't exist anymore, because the Supreme Court has now ruled that you don't need 12, you only need, who knows, it may be 2 or 3 after a while. But you see, this is what I'm talking about when I say fascism is something that begins, and it might look very small, but it spreads and it develops, and before you know it, it has crept up behind you, and there is nothing more you can do. And if you don't start fighting it, when you can look at it and isolate it, and try to cut out the cancer, it will have strangled everything around it, and there will be no more hope. But let's look at further examples of this encroaching fascism, creeping fascism. There's something called the Rodino Bill, which is now before Congress. And what does that say? That says that every person who is working and who may possibly be considered a foreigner has to have papers, or else that person can be deported.
Where are your
And you
papers?
see, particularly in this area,
Where are your
in
papers?
Southern California, it's used against Chicanos. And it's not only used against Chicanos who do not have papers, but it's something that can be used against Chicano political activists, because they can very easily set you up and say that you don't have papers and ship you out of the country.
Where are your papers?
We have to begin to understand that all of these things affect all of us. And we have to talk about establishing the greatest, most invulnerable kind of unity. Black and brown unity, black and brown and white unity, when it's a question of progressive white people who understand what is happening, who are willing to struggle against it. Because that is the only solution. Unity. Unity. And let me just give you what I feel is the most stunning example of that kind of unity to have emerged in this country in recent years. And I'm talking about the brothers at Attica. The brothers at Attica really got it together. Black prisoners, Puerto Rican prisoners, white prisoners stood united. And it was because of that unity that Rockefeller sent in all the police in the area, the military too, and probably would have gone in himself if he hadn't been afraid. They fear that unity, the oppressor, the repressor, the exploiter. But we have to counter all attempts to pit black people against brown people against black people. Because you see, one of the things that they do in order to divide the movement and to disrupt any attempt to build this unity is they'll tell Chicanos, well, black people have eaten all of the pie and there isn't any left for you. And then they'll tell black people, Chicanos have eaten all the pie and there isn't any left for you. And we know that they tell white workers, you better watch out for that black worker who's trying to get your job. But let me give you another very clear, very obvious example of those attempts to divide and disrupt. And I'm talking about all of Nixon's pronouncement about welfare. You know, he's been ranting and raving about welfare recipients, parasites, living off the taxes of working people. But let's look at what the real facts are. Let's look at the breakdown. First of all, whenever they talk about welfare recipients, they are implying, if they do not say so explicitly, black people and brown people. But you know, 55% of the people on welfare in this country are whites. 55%. And then they talk about the draining of the federal budget. But less than 4% of the federal budget is spent on welfare in the first place. Welfare is the most inhumane kind of system in this country, the most racist. But let's compare this $7.8 billion that comes out of the federal budget for welfare to the $120 billion defense budget. What does it mean? If anything is draining the taxes of the people in this country, it's the war in Indochina. And that potential war that they're trying to build up in South Africa and elsewhere in Africa where our sisters and brothers are struggling for their liberation. But getting back to the question of welfare, let me just tell you who is on welfare. We said, first of all, that 55% of the people on welfare are white. Let's look at the breakdown of the categories of welfare recipients. Now, 24% are old age recipients. And you see, Nixon kept talking about all these lazy, shiftless black and brown people who don't want to work. Okay, 24% are old age recipients. 8% are permanently and totally disabled, so they can't work. 1% are blind. 50.3% are children. 2.9% are incapacitated parents in homes. 13% are mothers. And 1/5 of that 13% of mothers are in job training. Or they are employed already and are making so little money that they have to resort to welfare in order to survive. So you end up with 0.8%, 0.8% who are able-bodied men who are also seeking jobs. So what is all of this work ethic that Nixon has been talking about, this laziness? It's obvious that it's just an attempt to create a hysterical racist atmosphere in this country so that you end up with a situation like what happened at Southern University yesterday when 2 black students were killed. I would like to move briefly into another area, an area where you find many, many symptoms of creeping fascism. And that's the area of political prisoners. And this is something that I feel very close to because I know what it is like to be a political prisoner. And after I was acquitted, I committed myself to devoting all of my time and energy towards building a movement to free all political prisoners. All political prisoners and victims of racist repression in this country. And we don't have to look very far at all if we want to know where some of the political prisoners in this country are. I know I don't have to look very far because my former co-defendant, Michelle McGee, is awaiting trial in San Quentin prison. There is Ricardo Chavez Ortiz, who hijacked the plane. But as the brother said, he felt that this would be a way to dramatize the racist oppression which Chicanos and black people have to deal with every moment of their lives. His gun wasn't even loaded when he hijacked the plane. And he called a press corps and made a very long and moving statement about the condition of people of color in this country today. His trial has already unfolded. He has been convicted and sentenced to life, I think. And he's one of the brothers around whom we're building a movement because he can win on appeal, and we have to fight for his freedom. And we have to talk about the San Quentin Six. Do you know who the San Quentin Six are?
All right, her war talk and her government waste talk, just change the names of the politicians and change the names of the wars, and it still holds relevant today. What she's saying is still so relevant, just different names.
The San Quentin Guards, you see, it's the same story. They try to cover up for their own misdoings by shoving the entire load on our backs. And so they indicted 6 brothers with a whole string of charges. They just don't stop. Among those 6 brothers is Fleeta Drumgo. And you see, Fleeta has already been acquitted as a Soledad brother. But because they couldn't get him with that frame-up charge, they pinned another one on him. So we have to fight for the freedom of the San Quentin Six. And there's Gary Lawton. Do you know who Gary Lawton is? You really should, because the incident with which he is charged took place in Riverside, California, and that's not too far away from here. His trial is taking place at this very moment. He's being charged with the killing of 2 policemen. And you see, the witness to that incident said that Gary Lawton didn't look anything like the person who would kill the policeman. Yet and still, Gary Lawton was a political activist. He was a brother who spoke up for the rights of black people, who struggled, and as soon as they found something they could use to set him up, they tried to railroad him right through to the gas chamber. And we still have to talk about the possibility of the gas chamber.
Of course.
Because one of the things that happened during that mudslide re-election of Richard Nixon was that people in this state voted to reinstate the death penalty. And then we have to talk about 3 brothers like Los Tres in Southern California. Brothers who were involved in the anti-drug movement, like H. Rap Brown.
All right. We're doing interview night.
Thank you for sitting down with me. Were you ever bullied?
So, we're doing interview night. We're going to start out with something funny because mental clarity is important. Mental health is important. But yeah, Angela Davis killing it. Freaking all that stuff is so relevant still. Quarterly statement. Very relevant. Just change the names and everything still works. But we'll start the show this way tonight and rock on for a while. Let's see how it goes, huh? Start out with Songify This. Angela Davis, thank you very much. Again, John Mearsheimer, and then Dennis Kucinich, Vivek, some more bullshit. The short ones are short, we'll watch the whole thing. The long ones will only watch the whole thing if they're fantastic. At midnight, we have a dual stream. We're going to jump with YouTube and read the International Convention of the Suppression and Punishment of Crime of Apartheid. I'm going to go over that. So we're going to do a read aloud, a dual stream with YouTube, try to grow the show a little bit. Maybe Humans Right Watch talk. I got this article dug up. Might do this another night. Tomorrow night, Republican debate. I want to jump on and kind of do a wrap up of that tomorrow night possibly. But let's start out this night, the real show.
No, I wasn't.
Has it happened that somebody has done something to you to wound you?
I try and unwound myself.
Mr. Trump, some have suggested that you refused to release your tax returns because of your extreme privacy concerning your hobbies.
Yo-ho!
It's gonna be a throwdown in
All right.
November.
Do this.
Whoever sings the best.
Commercial. All right, interview with John Mearsheimer unravels especially dangerous Israeli-Gaza war system update with Glenn Greenwald as the interviewer, my bad. So yeah, I have not, this is from a whole week ago, so the numbers will be skewed, but I have not seen it. And as you know, if you've not seen it, it's new to you. This is just one of those things. Glenn's not on the top of my radar by any means, and I will try to find him once in a while. And when I saw that he did this interview, I put it on the watch later list, and I guess I just kept saving it and saving it and saving it, and here it is a whole week later, and I haven't watched it. I feel just dirty and ashamed. So let's watch it together. And Glenn talks slow enough, and John talks slow enough that we can watch it at 1 1/4. It's interesting, it's informative, but we also don't have all day. All right, come on. 1 minute, 23 second ad. We're going to pay Glenn for his time. Only one ad. Only one ad, Glenn. And then we will be skipping the rest of this shit. All right. One interview, one clip. Israel and Gaza, oh my goodness. It's just saturating the news, saturating our brains. That's also what they're going to talk about with Dennis Kucinich. And I'm sure every single person will mention it at least one point tonight. I apologize that the news is saturated with one story, but that's the way our 24/7 news cycle works. And tomorrow we'll listen to the Republicans talk about it. Hooray, hooray. But stay vigilant, keep your head above sand, right? That's the only way we can fight the man. If you keep your head above sand, it's the only way you can fight the man. Only on Rumble, as we watch it on YouTube.
On System Update, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us.
My pleasure, Glenn.
So it has been a couple of months since we had you on. I think it was either late June or early July, and we had a long conversation. Needless to say, there has been a lot that has happened since then, starting with this horrific attack on Israeli civilians by Hamas on October 8th, and now we're about 2.5 weeks or 3 weeks into that, and there has been a kind of nonstop bombardment by Israel of Gaza, and we're obviously going to get into a lot of the specifics of what this means geopolitically and for the U.S., but just what is your general view of these events thus far?
Well, I think they're truly shocking. I think hardly anybody expected the Middle East to blow up. We were focusing on Ukraine and to a lesser extent on China.
Taiwan.
And all of a sudden you had this eruption in the Middle East. And it's quite amazing the extent to which the Ukraine issue has been pushed to the back pages. And the focus is almost exclusively on what's happening in the Middle.
That is true. 8 months ago, we were talking about a dual war fighting Ukraine and China, or fighting Russia and Ukraine and China and Taiwan. That was just 6 months ago. Just 3 months ago, I think that was kind of the focus. Even 3 months ago, we were talking about a dual war, and here we are. It's not even being mentioned.
Middle East. And I think appropriately so, because it is an especially dangerous situation. The potential for escalation here, I think, is much greater than it is in Ukraine.
So, and that's saying a lot because we've spent time, I know you have separately and I have separately, and then when we were together we did as well, talking about the very real risk of escalation from this war in Eastern Europe, where you have all of NATO on one side and the largest nuclear power in Russia on the other. So when you say there's a greater risk of escalation in this situation than that one, that's saying quite a bit. How likely do you think escalation is, in the sense that it might start involving other regional actors like Hezbollah or Iran or Syria, or even now kind of a new conflict in the West Bank?
I think,
and remember, I know everybody knows, they've already bombed 3 other places. They have bombed southern Lebanon, they have bombed in western Syria, and they have bombed in northern Egypt. So Israel's already done the provocation here.
that it's very hard to say with any degree of certainty whether or not you're going to get escalation in this case. But I think there is a non-trivial chance. To be a bit more specific, I think a lot depends on whether or not the Israelis actually do invade Gaza with ground forces. It seems like they're going to do that. That's what their rhetoric says, but who knows for sure. And I think if they invade Gaza and there are massive civilian casualties, which seems almost inevitable, then there'll be a very powerful temptation for Hezbollah to come in. And if Hezbollah comes in, then possibly Iran will come in, and this one could really spin out of control. I mean, one wants to remember that Hezbollah has 150,000 plus rockets and missiles, many of which are quite accurate. And if they were to come in the war and unleash a good chunk of that missile force at Israel, the damage would be enormous. And of course, the Israelis would lash out at Lebanon and in particular at Hezbollah. And then the question is, if Hezbollah was in trouble, would the Iranians come to the rescue? So there's just, a number of ways that.
And the Iranians have one of the largest standing armed forces in the area. I believe they have the largest standing armed army in the entire region. So, yeah, we want Iran, who has more boots to be on the ground than anybody in the region. We don't want them involved. The U.S. strategically does not want them involved.
This can spin out of control.
One of the tactics the Israelis are using to try and deter those other actors, including Hezbollah, from entering the war is essentially by saying, you see what we're doing here to Gaza, you see what we're doing to Hamas. If you want that to be brought to your country and worse, then go ahead and get involved, but if you don't, then you shouldn't. And I think there probably must be some caution on the part of these other actors who know that a war with Israel can inflict a lot of damage on Israel, but will also result in a lot of damage on their country or their faction as well. The question I have, though, is to what extent do the populations in these other countries, not just Iran necessarily, but Yemen, in Syria, in Iraq, and Iran, and then even the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia and Jordan and the like, how those populations are already kind of agitated at what they're seeing if this goes on for a lot longer with the ground invasion, especially, they're going to get even more, they're going to get angrier and angrier. To what extent could that kind of force these governments to take reprisals or retaliatory steps against Israel in order to kind of keep their own domestic populations placated?
Let me make.
Had to figure that was coming. Like I said, Glenn, you only get one ad. Sorry, buddy.
Let me make the argument in two steps. The first step is to understand that for Hezbollah or Iran, the cost of getting into a war would be enormous. That's your point. The cost would be enormous. But sometimes states or organizations like Hezbollah are willing to pursue extremely costly strategies because the political incentives to do so are so great. In other words, if they saw something horrible happening to the Palestinian civilian population in Gaza, they may feel compelled for political reasons to absorb those enormous military costs. Second part of my answer gets at your question about the populations down below. It is possible that public opinion in these countries will encourage those elites to pursue these costly strategies. And the elites may have real doubts about whether it makes sense to do this because of the military costs that you described, but they may feel that they have no choice because of public opinion from below. I would note that in 1948, when a series of Arab armies invaded Israel, which had declared its independence. It's important to understand that those Arab armies did not want to fight against Israel. They understood that they could not win the war against Israel. They were too weak. But popular opinion, public opinion, in effect, pushed them to attack Israel. And in the end, they were defeated because they were inferior. So one doesn't want to underestimate these circumstances where public opinion in the Arab world might be strong enough to push the elites to start a war that will be very costly.
When we talk about ask you about the U.S. role here, the Biden administration is saying what more or less every American administration has said every time Israel is involved in a new conflict, which is we are firmly on the side of Israel. We're here to give Israel everything that they need. The Biden administration did more than just say that. They deployed 2 aircraft carriers to the region. They said that they're there to deter involvement by these other regional actors. And then you have a lot of Republican politicians, some running for president and desperately needing attention and a boost to their campaign, but others, the kind of senators who are often calling for this sort of thing, explicitly saying that it's time for us to go and bomb Iran, to bomb their oil refineries, even without waiting for evidence or proof that they were actually involved in the attack. But certainly, if they are, then to go and do that. How likely do you think the United States would really be willing to get involved in this war in a direct military way, the way we haven't been willing to do in Ukraine? And then B, what would be the consequences of doing something like bombing infrastructure in Iran?
Well, I think the American foreign policy elites, and certainly the Biden administration, do not want to get involved in a war with Iran. I think they understand that that would be a huge mistake. And in fact, I believe that we're deploying forces into the Gulf now. We're moving an aircraft carrier battle group and all sorts of air defense capabilities into the Gulf, all for the purposes of deterring Iran. We don't want Iran to start a war because we don't want to get sucked into that war. And at the same time, we're certainly not going to initiate a war against Iran ourselves, at least given the present political situation. So I think that it is unlikely that we would initiate a war. But this is not to deny that there are some politicians who are calling for war, but thankfully they're not in the Biden administration.
The question of motives is always very difficult to try and explore. People to this very day debate what was the motive for the United States to have gone and invaded Iraq. And one reason it's difficult is because usually different actors have different motives. There's not just one motive. But if I can get you to focus for a second on the, let's call it the Israeli motives for how they're responding. This idea that we're going to destroy Hamas, we're going to bomb in a fairly unrestrained way, more unrestrained than I think they've bombed Gaza certainly in the past, and we're only at the beginning and not the end. Naftali Bennett, in an essay in The Economist, said the Israeli motive is to finally put so much fear into the enemies of Israel that they will just mentally submit and surrender. They will just give up in the idea that they can ever challenge Israel because they will know from now on, as a result of this example, that their destruction is essentially guaranteed. We had on a left-wing member of the Israeli Knesset who's a critic of the Netanyahu government, and he said he thinks part of the motive is to drive the Gazans out of Gaza because the official position of a lot of the partners of Netanyahu is to annex part of, if not all of, Gaza and the West Bank. And then there's the question of whether there's kind of an anger and thirst for vengeance motivating this as well. What do you think is the Israeli motive, either politically or geostrategically, in what they're doing?
Well, I think that the Israelis, in a perfect world, would like to ethnically cleanse Gaza. They'd like to drive all the Palestinians out of Gaza. And in fact, I think they'd like to drive all the Palestinians out of the West Bank. I think it makes, let me put it differently, I think it's understandable why they think that way. You want to understand.
Yes, it does.
Thank you for sitting down with me. Were you ever bullied?
No.
Don't know what just happened there. Seeing as that you're gonna run away from me. Touching the kitty cat.
So you think you know Wix, but do you really? First up, we've got shake video masks. You can use different shapes to create completely different.
That is the one thing that is weird.
I think that the Israelis, in a perfect world, would like to ethnically cleanse Gaza. They'd like to drive all the Palestinians out of Gaza. And in fact, I think they'd like to drive all the Palestinians out of the West Bank. I think it makes, let me put it differently, I think it's understandable why they think that way. You want to understand, Glenn, that inside Greater Israel, which includes, of course, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, there are about 7.3 million Palestinians and 7.3 million Jews. There's rough equality between the two sides. And given that situation, the Israelis have to think about how to deal with that huge Palestinian population that, by the way, will end up in a few years probably being larger than the Jewish population. So that state can't be a democratic state, because if it was a democratic state, it would no longer be a Jewish state, given that the Palestinians outnumber the Jews. And you could go to a two-state solution. This is what a lot of people in Israel and American policymakers have wanted to do. They wanted to sort of cut the country up, Greater Israel up, and give the Palestinians a state and have a Jewish state side by side. But that's no longer possible. The Israelis have no interest in a two-state solution. So in effect, what you have now is an apartheid state. This is what Human Rights Watch has said. This is what Amnesty International has said.
The former head.
Literally was going to read that Human Rights Watch at some point here. I'm debating if I want to read that out tonight or tomorrow, but the read alouds are important. It's diagnostic, I guess, or whatever. It's sure as heck not entertaining or fun. So again, if you don't want to be here at midnight, I understand. Reading aloud of one of these documents is not going to be the most entertaining thing, but it is good for a YouTube boost here and there. So we're going to do it.
The Mossad said this just last month, that Israel has now arrived in this apartheid status.
Right. But Israel as an apartheid state, in my opinion, is not sustainable over the long term. Right. And again, you're not going to go to a two-state solution. You're not going to go to a pure democracy where Palestinians and Israeli Jews have equal rights. So what can you do to solve this problem? And I believe lots of Israelis on the right especially think that ethnic cleansing is the way to go. And I think there are a number of people who are interested in slamming the Palestinians now and pushing them into Egypt. That would be an ideal solution. You get them out of Gaza and then you don't let them back in. So I think that is the best solution for lots of Israelis. The problem is the Palestinians are well aware that that's what the Israelis want to do. The Jordanians and the Egyptians are well aware that that's what the Israelis want to do. And the end result is they're not going to let that happen. Therefore, the Israelis are pushed back to a situation where they want to decisively defeat Hamas and install in the Gaza Strip a governing body that will live in peace with Israel. But this is not going to happen. I don't think they can destroy Hamas. And if they do destroy Hamas, another group will pop up to replace it.
Netanyahu has officially said that Israel will be governing Gaza when this is all said and done. He says Israel will be governing Gaza when this is all said and done. Just so we know. That's the new update.
Hamas that will be just as tough and just as committed to fighting against Israel. So if you look carefully at where the Israelis are today, they're in a no-win situation. If they attack into Gaza, that's going to cause all sorts of problems, and they're not going to end up ultimately solving the problem. And if they don't attack into Gaza, it's going to look like Hamas won, and Israel was afraid to invade Gaza and deal with the problem. So they're in a damned if you do, damned if they do situation.
I guess one of the possibilities in the ones that you listed is that the Israelis just keep killing so many people in Gaza, keep destroying so much of Gaza, that it will at least take a long time for the people of Gaza, for Hamas to regroup, that if you just, really just bomb them into smithereens, people are talking about turning it into a parking lot. Ordinarily, the idea would be, well, the Israelis are going to be constrained by external forces from doing that. The people in the world who Israel needs are not just going to let Israel use the kind of force that violates every humanitarian norm, every law of war that has been in place since World War II. I referenced earlier the fact that the Biden administration publicly is saying, we're going to give the Israelis everything we need, not 1 inch of difference between them in public. I'm wondering, though, and I don't know if you can know this for sure, but whether you have enough of a sense to be comfortable kind of speculating about the extent to which the Americans, or maybe even the Europeans, or somebody, are meaningfully encouraging or demanding Israel in private restrain the amount of force that they're using when it comes to the Gazans.
I would bet a lot of money that the Americans are telling the Israelis that they have to be extremely careful in terms of how many civilians that they kill. They've already killed a substantial number of civilians. I think the number is close to 6,000 at this point, and approximately 2,500.
11,000, over 5,000 children. The number is now 11,000 with over 5,000 children.
Of those 6,000 people that the Israelis have killed are children. So this is beginning to look very bad for Israel and for the United States, which of course is joined at the hip with Israel. And the Americans are well aware, and I would imagine even some Israelis are well aware, that this could lead to unending trouble in terms of Israel's standing in the world. So there are limits to how many civilians they can kill. And I think the Americans are telling them that they should be very careful in this regard moving forward. But see, this causes an enormous problem for the Israelis, because then they really can't deal with Hamas. They can't eliminate Hamas. The only way they can possibly eliminate Hamas is to go in with massive force and kill huge numbers of civilians. And this is, I don't think, doable. I think once they start going down that road, world opinion and even Western opinion and even American opinion will put tremendous pressure on them to back off. And the end result is that they will back off, or they will reduce the killing. And the end result is that Hamas will survive to fight another day. Again, the Israelis are damned if they do and damned if they don't.
Well, prior to the outbreak of this war, there were some neoconservative outlets, journals in the United States, that essentially were arguing that it's time for the United States to cut off aid to Israel, or more so, it's time for the Israelis to get off of United States aid, precisely because they say it restrains the Israelis from doing what they know is in their national security or national interest to do. They should be bombing Iran. They should be using a lot more force against the Palestinians. And this dependence on this US aid that is the thing that constrains them. And then you have at the same time in that Economist essay I mentioned by Naftali Bennett, the former Israeli prime minister, right before Netanyahu returned, part of what he was arguing was, look, we're appreciative of American aid. But we are in a position now after this attack where we're not going to allow the Americans or world opinion any longer to stop us from doing what we know we need to do. And you wrote the definitive book, which I actually want to ask you about in a second, which was the Israel lobby with Professor Walt, who we just had on the show a couple of weeks ago, about the state of American public opinion as it pertains to Israel and the efficacy of a lobby that is in Washington, like many other lobbies that are powerful. They have a powerful lobby as well to keep America on Israel's side when it comes to foreign policy. So heading into a 2024 election, I guess what I'm asking is there maneuverability for the Biden administration to put so much pressure on Israel to try and restrain it? Won't they be afraid that Netanyahu might say, look, Joe Biden is kind of interfering with what we're trying to do, just like Netanyahu kind of had open warfare with Obama during the Obama years, and the White House would be afraid that that could be politically harmful to it if that breaks out into public?
I think there's no question that you can imagine a situation where the United States tries to put serious pressure on Israel to modulate the attack in Gaza, to limit the amount of force that they use, and the Israelis resist. I mean, you can imagine that situation. The question then becomes, how much pressure is the United States willing to put on Israel? How desperate is the United States? And it's very hard to say, because there's no question that the lobby, Israel's supporters, Israel's staunch supporters in the United States will put pressure on the White House not to put pressure on Israel, for the White House not to put pressure on Israel. That's likely to happen. But if the United States is desperate enough, if it feels that it just has to put an end to this conflict in Gaza, or it has to limit what the Israelis are doing, I believe the administration will do what they have to do. But am I 100% certain of that? No. But all of this shows you, Glenn, how much of a problem we face because we are joined at the hip with Israel. One of the points that Steve and I made in the book is that it would be much better for the United States, and indeed much better for Israel, if we treated it as a normal country. And if we treated Israel as a normal country, we would now have more distance between ourselves and Israel, and it would be easier for us to put pressure on the Israelis. But given the fact that the Biden administration...
It'd be crazy if we treated them like a real country and not like a military outpost. That would be nuts. Not gonna happen. Man, there's so much light here for me to be seeing. It's hurting my head. I have so much light here so that I can be clear. It's kind of hurting my head. I need this fucking camera to be fixed. My camera's fantastic. The webcam sucks. I think it sucks. Alright, let's move on. This is our comedy break tonight.
Coming up next, the Chinese invent a new way to pee in Coke. But first, lying has a new enemy, detectors. Magic window, hit me in the back.
One of my most famous quotes for myself, if you've ever, you like that, buddy? If you ever hang out too long in this channel, you will hear me say, it's crack, it's great, it gets you really high. This is my line. My favorite little section here.
Crack. Now let's look at the weatherman.
Mr. Show. I love Mr. Show. Okay.
Now you talk about terror.
Anybody?
What about for me?
No.
I've been terrorized all my days.
Very much so, Chris Hendricks.
All my days.
As a member of the U.S. Congress for 16 years, Dennis Kucinich gave over 500 speeches warning about the consequences of U.S. wars against Afghanistan, the Balkans, Iraq, Iran, Libya, and Syria. He also spoke out for the imperative of peace in the Middle East on behalf of Israelis and Palestinians. He met with leaders of many countries who were grappling to keep their nations out of conflicts and came to understand the role some in the U.S. government have played to intentionally catalyze war, fueling arms sales globally without regard for the consequences. Dennis warns that we, in his words, are cartwheeling towards a massive East versus West war with religious and ethnic overtones. This seemingly inexorable march of nuclear folly may, he writes, pit the United States militarily against China, Russia, and their allies, Joining me to discuss how, as he writes, the polarization of U.S. politics, the cognitively impaired and failing executive branch, the instability of the congressional leadership, the pure-blind partisanship, the ideologically clickbait-driven media has produced a mad bloodlust for war against Iran and perhaps China and Russia, is Dennis Kucinich. You have fought the war.
Dumb. I'm pausing it or muting myself like I have headphones. I can talk while I do this. Dennis Kucinich would definitely be my choice for a presidential candidate. If we're going to pick some old white dude, he would be my choice. I'm not saying I would want him to run in any of the parties, maybe Green Party, or I don't know. But if we're going to pick some old white dude, he would be my choice at the moment.
War industry with probably more consistency and courage than any U.S. politician. You've paid the price for it. But let's just lay out globally the reach of the war industry and how it functions and why it seems to be beyond the control of either political party.
Well, thank you very much, Chris, for that introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to be on your show. We are in a moment of peril, and the subtext of it, or maybe the context of it, begins with the fact that the United States has over 800 bases around the globe. This has been a part.
I think the number we officially state is like 450, 500 officially, but it is a very well-known fact because of things like GPS tracking and things like Google Maps, where people can literally see where their friends are, and I don't know, phone tracking and stuff like that. These things have been proven that we're over 800, 850, but officially it's like 450.
Part and parcel of an attempt by America to use its military power to be able to control not just the politics of a country, but an economics of a country, and to stop the rise of any counterforce in the world. Of course, we know that that was vainglorious. The efforts have failed, and notwithstanding the fact that we have this archipelago of bases around the world, we have slipped from a position of unipolar leadership to moving to a multipolar world, which the United States has less and less influence upon, with the exception of certain economic moves that can be made to try to hamstring the economies of various countries through sanctions. Now, where this all begins is at the appropriations process. The military-industrial complex that Eisenhower so famously warned us about in January of 1961 has every district of the United States, every congressional district has programs and projects in it that require funding and are put into an appropriations bill. Lobbyists confront members of Congress from their own community saying, we need this for the jobs in our community. And together you have a defense production establishment which is which is nationwide, and it has enormous influence with individual members. Now, beyond that, you have when members of Congress come in and they take an oath to defend the Constitution, unfortunately, for many members of Congress, that means to just sign on to any military action which the administration recommends. And so there's very little deep thinking that goes on, especially where the money's going to come from, because the 31 trillion plus national debt, which the United States has a substantial part of that, it comes from the country putting wars on a credit card. So ingrained into our system is the funding of wars and a perpetuation of conflict. Because if you're making all these arms material, you've got to use them. And the more that you use, the more you make. And there's a continuous loop here of money that just pours in. Right now, we're close to $1 trillion in this particular fiscal year, 2023, for the Pentagon, plus the various intelligence services. And so that then is a substantial part of discretionary spending of the United States, depending on who you're talking to and what math. It's anywhere from 40 to 45%. So we're spending our national treasure on war. We're a war machine as a nation. We prefer war over healthcare. We prefer war over housing. We prefer war over education. We prefer war over the economic welfare of our own citizens. And this is something that more and more people are catching on to. And unfortunately, the last ones to catch on appear to be members of the United States Congress.
So how are decisions about war made?
They're making a choice not to catch on because they're bought and paid for. That's not a anomaly. That is a well-documented fact. These people are bought and paid.
We see the public shills for war, the same people, whether it's Iraq or Libya or Syria or Afghanistan, these neocons who are well known, who brought us the war, 20 years of warfare in the Middle East. But they are spokespeople for, obviously, the war industry. If we look back at the last 2 decades, it's just fiasco after fiasco. I mean, nobody can describe any of these wars as a success. Who's making these decisions, and why is it bipartisan?
The decisions to go to war ostensibly would be made at the administration level. However, there is a broad network of public policy groups masquerading as independent voices, think tanks, academic organizations, people in the media who feed into any kind of narrative that would prompt the country to start to rattle the sabers or determine, well, we need to go here in order to defend our national interest. So once that appropriation process starts, let's keep in mind, you have close to $1 trillion in all accounts. They're on their own. I mean, that money's fungible. That money's there, which enables the United States at this very moment to send 2 aircraft carrier units out into the area near Israel. Now, you have to wonder, what's that all about? And what it's all about is that the United States right now has the money to be able to send troops anywhere they want in the world, or to pay for the ones that are already stationed. And they put the country at the threshold of a war the minute they do that. And when I say of a war, I mean of actual combat interactions. And the people who are pushing for this, we have to keep in mind that one of the things that drags us into war is an ideological mindset. Today in the United States, it's sponsored by a group famously known as neoconservatives, who see America as a force fighting against evil all over the world. And the Manichaean struggle, which they invite, is one that is generally of their own making, the desire to be able to create wars and to cash in. I mean, there are earnings reports coming out lately where some of the war contractors or those who hold them in a portfolio are citing what a great thing it is for the profits that are going to come as a result of what's happening in the Middle East right now. It's unconscionable. But we're in this cycle where we have a war-dependent economy. And the more that we spend on war materiel, the more likely we are to go to war. The more people we have at forward base around the world, the more likely we are to go to war. When an international crisis develops, such as has developed after most famously signed October 7th, 2023, we then see things go into motion that will support and justify the reason why we are there to begin with. And then from there, we go on to additional appropriations. And one of the things that I want to point out, the over $14 billion, which Congress will vote on perhaps at the beginning of November. Once Congress votes on that, forget declarations of war, Article 1, Section 8, the role of Congress in balancing off the executive's desire to go to war. Forget all that. Once the money is there. We're stuck. And it's kind of like gamblers, in for a dime, in for a dollar. Once we put that money down, we are at war, whether it's declared or not. And this is the danger of the moment that we're in right now, because the American people, unless they can convince their members of Congress, for whatever reason, whether it's, as one member of Congress, Tom Massey from Kentucky said, we can't afford it. That's one way. Another way is to say, don't fuel the fire. Another way is to say, stop killing the Gazans. I mean, there are so many different reasons to avoid it, but the American people have to be heard from immediately. Call their members of Congress to say, don't fund the war. If they're so intent on spending money, spend it for diplomacy, spend it for humanitarian purposes, spend it for food, shelter, clothing, electricity, water, anything to try to relieve people from the veil of tears they're in right now and the fears for their life. But right now, our country, we are ready for war, and it's not just about funding an effort against the people of Gaza, but it's about getting ready for war against Iran, which would be catastrophic for the United States and for Israel. So I think that we're really at a crossroads right here, Chris, and the piece that I wrote in Substack kind of outlines the contours of it, because this war has both, it's not just geographical, it is ethnic and it is religious.
You have a situation where once the money comes in, it's not a congressional decision, it's a unilateral decision by the White House. For instance, to send these carriers. No, Biden didn't consult anybody, except maybe Jake Sullivan, who probably made the decision for Biden. But all that power, that potential to essentially trigger a war is in the hands of the presidency. Congress isn't even part of the decision.
Once the money is there, and this is what I'd like your viewers to understand, you have the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, which the founders clearly put the power to make war in the hands of the House, because they didn't want an executive just roaming the world looking for enemies to slay, as Adams famously warned about. But if the Congress approves an appropriation that the president then wants to take to create a war, courts have held pretty consistently that Congress's ultimate power is the power of the purse. And if Congress wants to stop a war, don't fund it. If Congress wants to start a war, fund it. But Congress cannot go back after it funds a war and say, oh, we didn't mean that. We didn't mean for him to escalate. Hey, once they have the money, the administration, the president as commander-in-chief under the Constitution is able to use that war material in any way that he or in the future she would please.
And yet we see no pushback. I mean, the last budget, I think the Congress gave the Pentagon $40 billion more than they even requested. And in many ways, the Democratic Party is worse.
Yeah, it's become reflexive. The inability to ask questions about why. I mean, only after the fact will you see Inspector General's reports come back and say, well, you misspent billions here, billions there. After a while, it adds up. You go back to Major General Smedley Butler, who won 2 Medals of Honor for his service to the country at the beginning of the 20th century. And he concluded, famously, war's a racket. And this is a racket. And the members of Congress just go along. Look, let's face it. Once Citizens United became the law of the land and money equaled free speech from the corporate standpoint, all this entire defense establishment was emboldened to just pour money into congressional races, and they do, it, openly through $5,000 contributions or whatever they're allowed right now, and in addition to that, super PACs, which can make a difference in a congressional or a Senate race. So we have a almost a closed loop system that guarantees that we will continue to go to war, and there is no counterbalance for diplomacy or peace. That doesn't exist. The Department of State is there to rattle the saber, as the current Secretary of State Blinken has proven. The National Security Advisor Sullivan, he's there to keep fulminating. And of course, we know about the gentlelady who is a deputy secretary who has famously kept her neoconservative credentials alive since the beginning of her service to the United States as somebody who promotes war. So we have an entire phalanx of people at the administrative level who are promoting it every day. And they're supported by the think tanks, academics, the media. People don't question. And so we get pulled into this maw of war, and then people wonder why. Well, watch when American troops, when their lives are put on line, they're already being out there as bait, as far as I'm concerned. Our troops are in that region as bait. And if and when the troops start to die, and you get reports, maybe some have already, but if and when that starts to happen in large numbers, the American people are going to be horrified.
That's fair. I haven't considered that, but kind of fucked up theory, but that's fair. If you get enough troops to die, then America's persuasion will be there. We'll be ready for any war if enough troops die. Put a couple troops in the wrong place and just, they feel like they have to defend themselves, and all of a sudden we're in a war. Fair.
But the money could go out this week unless people call and object strongly. That's the way you stop a war. Stop funding it.
What they're playing with, as you've written, is a very dangerous global conflagration. It's like, tossing lit matches in towards pools of gasoline, not only in the Ukraine and not only in the Middle East, but also with China. The consequences are potentially catastrophic. In the case of China and Russia, we're dealing, of course, with nuclear powers. And then, of course, Israel has nuclear weapons. There's nothing to stop Israel from using a tactical nuclear weapon on Iran. Talk a little bit about how this could all go bad.
When we have these discussions about the danger which we can sense lies ahead, we have to look at things not out of fear, but out of a cold strategic analysis. The United States and Israel are seen as simultaneous in the actions in Gaza right now. That has created a furor, particularly in the Arab and in the Muslim world. The head of Turkey, Erdogan, just yesterday gave a speech to about 1 million people where he warned about, he invoked the image of the crescent versus the cross. We're talking crusades here, folks. The idea that if the United States and Israel are aimed at trying to wipe out people who are Arabs and most of whom are Muslims, what does that say to the rest of the Muslim world, which 9 million people in Israel, maybe 1.5 million of them Palestinians, in the larger Arab world surrounding Israel, hundreds of millions of Muslims and Arabs who are watching people in Gaza being slaughtered. So the emotional turmoil that comes from that then is informed by a very deep religious sentiment that is being provoked by the first week of October, ultra-nationalists marching from Temple Mount into Al-Aqsa and rearranging the furniture, shall we say politely. It could be, depending on who you talk to, that what we experienced on October 7th, notwithstanding the apparently very thorough planning that went on, that we had an Al-Aqsa intifada as a flashpoint, because the destruction or the desecration of anything at Al-Aqsa is going to be responded to. And there are those in the ultra-nationalists who are all ready to try to push the Palestinians out of Gaza, push them, kill them, and then the Palestinians in West Bank, and to fulfill a dream that for them has biblical um, authorization for the fulfillment of the land of Israel, and then to rebuild the third temple, which of course would annihilate Al-Aqsa. When we start to get into religious sentiments and beliefs that go back thousands of years, and we have people motivated by prophecy, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it can lead to, it can lead right to the Bible, which talks about uh, Armageddon, the apocalypse. I mean, that's why we have to take this seriously. We can't just pretend, well, that'll never happen. Actually, it's moving in that direction right now. The leader of Turkey pronouncing crescent versus cross, raising the issue. Are we coming to that? We can't. This is I often talk about Barbara Tuchman's book, The March of Folly, where she writes as a historian. It's nothing new under humanity for leaders to prepare a course of action and execute it that is totally antithetical to the interests of their country. And this is what Mr. Netanyahu is doing with support from the right wing in Israel in enacting this biblical phraseology that he is quoting lately. There's a game being played here that is so dangerous that could pull us all into not just a regional war, but a world war. And so those are some of the antecedents that we have to consider when we're looking at an analysis of what we could be facing.
And why isn't the Biden administration offering any restraint? I mean, canceling or vetoing the ceasefire resolution at the UN, giving more military aid. It's not just they're passive, but they're actively involved. Why?
Well, first of all, you have to look at President Biden himself. He has never really been anyone who has said, whoa, wait a minute, let's not do this. He's generally been congenial to voting for war as a senator and voting for certainly defense or Pentagon appropriations. So that's where it's at. And then who surrounds him? The neocons that are his closest advisors. And they're spoiling for a war against Iran. This has been going on since Bush was president. There's no question about it. I mean, I gave about 150 speeches just on Iran alone, where I saw the Bush administration was actually talking about a strike on a nuclear research lab at Bashir. And I pointed out in a speech in Congress, we go ahead and do that. We're going to be creating a radioactive fallout around a good part of the globe. And is that something we're thinking about? So this is there an intention to take us right to the precipice here of a war? Absolutely. You can't say they're just stumbling into this. No, these people are not stupid. I mean, I might question the rationale, and I do, behind their decisions, but they're ideologically driven. And some have said, look, just as let's use this to go after Iran, just like the pronouncement was made after 9/11, let's use this to go after Iraq. And it's the declensions of war. Iraq, Iran to hell.
Why Iran? I mean, you have oil in Iran, you have more oil in Iraq. What is it? Do they think that is it just this vision that they're going to remake the Middle East into their own image? What do you think is driving this animus towards Iran? And of course, we have to be clear, Bibi Netanyahu has been pushing for a strike on Iran for a long time. And it's my understanding that the Pentagon has essentially been very wary about carrying out strikes against Iran.
I had a chance to talk to Mr. Netanyahu as a member of Congress on a committee that he testified to. And he at this committee, he said, well, the United States ought to go after this. Chris, this could have been 25 years ago, that the United States should go after Iraq, Iran, and Syria. And after the hearing, I met him in the hall and I said, Mr. Netanyahu, why don't you do it? And he said, oh, no, you should do it. This is leaders go to war for all kinds of reasons. Some reasons that they may be in political trouble and they think war is going to save them. That can be part of Netanyahu's calculus. Could also be part of Joe Biden's calculus. Wartime president, don't change horse in the middle of the stream, on and on and on. Iran, I think, in its nuclear research, represented a threat to Israel that, people who were otherwise condign on the issue of Iran said, hey, wait a minute, we better look at this. We don't really see eye to eye. They could try to strike us. And, in the dialectic of conflict, it goes into the calculus of a nuclear exchange. If you think the other guy's going to hit you, you might hit him first. And so that's one thing. Iran has risen as a technological power. It's not an Arab country; it is Persian, and it has developed a society which is advanced, It's not well understood by the United States that the people of Iran, they're not afraid of America. They don't expect to be attacked, but if they're attacked, they will respond and they'll be ready. And they've developed some very accurate missiles that can travel thousands of miles. The thing that I'm concerned about is that in this dialectic of conflict that we're seeing move along in an escalatory fashion, look, this could mean the end of Israel. I don't know why that isn't. I mean, I'm sure people in Israel are living with this, are starting to get concerned. Hey, where's this headed? But we cannot create a war with Iran without expecting a retaliatory strike with everything that Iran has on Israel itself. So it's like back off, stop it, stop this this forward momentum towards a cataclysm.
To what extent do you think these neocons who have orchestrated these debacles in the Middle East essentially are using Iran as a scapegoat? I mean, they made the mess, but are they kind of trying to offload it onto Iran? And once we get rid of Iran, our kind of utopian vision of the Middle East will appear?
Oh, I think that's part of it, no question about it. It I've got a library here. A lot of the books recently in the last 20 years are about Iraq. And it's very interesting how you can see the parallels between what we're doing in with respect to Iran right now. Now, the CIA reports that I saw, did not say that Iran was directly linked to what happened on October 7th. But there are those who want to create that connection now in order to blame Iran for that, just as we falsely blamed Iraq for 9/11. And Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. And according to our own intelligence agencies, Iran was not connected to October 7th. So there is this, it really goes back to the project for a new American century. We're talking about just as there are plans in Iraq that are driven by history and ideology and politics, so too in the United States. There are plans that are driven by similar metrics, and it puts us in a position where we're moving towards a war against Iran, and we're not really thinking about where is this going to take us. Like all of this, the ships, the carriers, the planes that we've already sent over ostensibly to protect Israel. No, they're really in a forward ready position to be able to deploy for an attack on Iran. And we're not fooling anyone, least of all Iran on this. Iran's been preparing for this for some time. And then one has to ask, as war planners sometimes do, where does this lead? China's already standing with Iran. We are already opposed to Russia and the games that were played with respect to Ukraine. So where do we go? We are looking at a conflict that inevitably will take us against two other nuclear powers, China and Russia. Isn't anybody aware of how dangerous this situation is with respect to standing guard for Israel while they go ahead and the government just levels Gaza and kills hundreds of thousands of people, perhaps? Somebody has to say, look, we're playing in the flash of World War III here, and we ought to stop. And it's beyond a ceasefire. There has to be a stand down and just stop it so that Israel can be secured from destruction, so that the Gazans can be protected from destruction, so that those in the West Bank can be protected from destruction, so that our nation and the nations of the world can be protected from destruction. One need only go back to the poetry of William Yeats, when he famously wrote The Second Coming, turning and turning in a widening gyre. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. All things fall apart. The center cannot hold. And what we're seeing here is the center of gravity that holds the world together right now is starting to fracture. And once that happens, the potential for a very wide war is introduced. And once it starts, it plays itself out as wars always do over, depending on what kind of weapons are used.
Well, and those carrier groups are not deployed in the Mediterranean. They're deployed in the Persian Gulf off the coast of Iran.
Right. Thank you. You're right about that.
So it's a very clear threat to Iran.
Well, that's why they're there in the Persian Gulf. Iran, Persian. Hello.
Yeah. Great. We can find you at DennisKucinich.substack.com. Is that correct?
Yes, that.
Yep, you can find Dennis there.
I just need change for $1. I just need quarters.
Another comedy break. These interviews are just getting to beat me up a little bit. The Israel, Palestine, Israel, Palestine, Israel, Palestine. Get my spirulina, try to get my heartburn down. Spirulina, it's better than Tums and healthier. Great for the acidity. All right. Vegetable soup's not sitting so well. Let's do a comedy break and the rest of these clips. That's one comedy break, and then we got a bunch of short clips. Again, Mr. Show comedy breaks.
I wish for the amazing new iPhone 15 Pro.
Sean, do you mean this one, the one with titanium? Switch to Verizon, you can trade in any...
Now, if it wasn't a corporate station, we could have the opportunity to skip it. Since it's ABC, we are forced through it because corporations get their ad money.
Congress is set to vote on the House's $14 billion Israel aid bill this afternoon. That bill would cut funding from the...
All right, this is not fun for either of us, but Vivek, long live Vivek, his jackass. I'm probably going to be getting annoyed with this one. 12 minutes, let's see if we can make it through half before I lose my shit.
IRS to pay for the new aid, with most Democrats and even a few Republicans opposed to that.
Our next guest has said over and over that he doesn't think more U.S. aid is in the best interest of Israel or the United States. Vivek Ramaswamy is running for the Republican nomination for President of the United States and joins us now. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.
So what do you think of this House bill, where the aid is tied to something domestic, whether or not there should be funding for the IRS?
So look, all else equal, when we're $33 trillion into national debt, I do think it's better to recapture those funds from somewhere else than not. But to take a bigger policy step back, I don't think it advances our best interests or Israel's best interests for us to specifically get involved in this war. I have said that I stand in absolute terms for Israel's right to its own national self-defense, push back against the UN or other multilateral international agencies that are pushing back on Israel's right to defend itself.
Israel's right to defend itself. What a fucking asshole motherfucker. All right, bombing a territory, an occupied territory, is a war crime. Defending yourself is a little bit of a stretch. But thank you for pushing the CIA narrative, you prick.
We will stand for Israel diplomatically. We will also stand by our pre-existing commitments of $3 to $3.8 billion per year to Israel. I will stand by that, but I don't...
Why? Why do they need so much money from us? Why does Israel need $3.3 billion a year from us in financial aid? One of the richest countries in the Middle East, stealing oil and natural resources everywhere they can. Why do they need so much money from us? Why does Israel need $3 billion a year from the United States? Why? Naturally, every year, not just this year of war. Every year they get that.
I don't think that specific involvement in this war is even a good idea for Israel, because that requires the U.S. to then ask hard questions about what exactly are the war objectives. And I don't think it's good for Israel to be second-guessed, and I don't think it's good for the U.S. to get involved in another war in the Middle East.
You don't think Israel should be second-guessed when they're bombing a occupied territory? Oh, dude, this guy's a tool bag piece of garbage. Wow. Just wow.
Fair enough. You've been standing out on this issue in the Republican Party and establishment traditional politics by really wanting to put the brakes on U.S. aid to Israel. And in some instances, you've said that there's an influence in this country that leads to more support for Israel. I just want to play a little bit of a conversation. I know you know what's coming that you had with Tucker Carlson before the war on aid for Israel. Take a listen.
But the selective nature of ignoring certain other conflicts, well...
So you have an interviewee, and then you're going to bring up a separate interview? Just ask him a question, man. This is some
even more importantly,
journalism.
ignoring the interests of the U.S. right here at home is what irritates the heck out of me, out of the politicians in both parties, and it is shameful, and I think that there are, frankly, financial and corrupting influences that lead them exactly to speak the way they do. That's just the hard truth.
So, Vivek, that got a lot of attention. Financial and corrupting influences that lead to our attention to some conflicts and not others. And it sounds like to a lot of people like you're talking about Jewish money and influence in America. Well, what else would it be?
Well, look, I was actually very clear. If you listen to that entire clip that I did with Tucker Carlson, I encourage everybody to watch the full podcast. We live in an era with podcasts which actually get to truth and then short news segments that pull and airlift things out of them. I was talking about Azerbaijan and Armenia immediately before I talked about those corrupting influences. And I do stand by this. Azerbaijan has invaded Armenia. Nobody's talking about it, or at least the Nagorno-Karabakh region where many Armenians have lived. And nobody's talking about it, despite Russia-Ukraine. This is a different part of the Russian periphery. And it is a fact that the Azerbaijani lobby is extremely strong, and that's exactly why they've been successful in securing pro-Azerbaijan policies, even though we'll talk...
Oh my God, are you pushing another war in another region of the fucking planet? Are you saying that we should get involved in another war? You fucking war hawk. Oh my God. He's so articulate, he can bomb anybody. Fuck this guy.
About good versus evil in the context of Russia versus Ukraine. Nobody's talking about it in the case of Azerbaijan versus Armenia. That's exactly what I was referring to with Tucker. But the point is, more broadly, I am an opponent. I'm a strong opponent. I think the only one in either political party today of the influence of special interests, lobbying, and super PACs. This should not be a Republican issue or a Democrat.
Wait, so you're anti-super PACs or lobbies, but you're for us giving $3 billion a year to Israel that has nothing to do with AIPAC? That has nothing to do with the biggest lobby in D.C.? Really? Really? Do you think I'm that big of a fucking idiot? Do you think everybody's that big of a fucking idiot? Maybe the Republicans that watch you and like you are fucking idiots, but most general people will be like, huh, you are anti-lobbyist, but you say all the things that lobbyists pay you to say? God. Alright, well that was quick. Fuck this guy. Let's do somebody else. I don't fucking be that dude. He sucks.
Is it possible to help keep our online...
So badly. I can't even do 3 minutes. What a human garbage trap. Jesus. I like garbage. Yum, yum, garbage. What a human garbage trap. Jesus. Can't even be anti-war for 10 seconds. Alright, moving on to more, I don't know, human trash. Target CEO Brian Cornell. CEO from Target. Shoppers are pulling back, even on groceries. Let's see what this human trash has to say.
For his first television interview since March to talk about some of the challenges facing the retailer. Everything from the backlash around Pride Month merchandise and messaging to the crunch that consumers are still feeling from high inflation. We started with what Cornell learns from shoppers' behavior.
They're managing that budget really carefully. And it's certainly pressuring discretionary spending.
Meaning they're buying less stuff.
They're buying less stuff. Even within food and beverage. Again, we look at overall retail spending, just look at the top line, you say, right, a really healthy consumer, and they are spending. But even in food and beverage categories, over the last few quarters, the units, the number of items they're buying, has been declining. So they're even tightening up their spending in those categories. But in discretionary goods, we've seen 7 consecutive quarters of both dollars and units declining. So you're buying less apparel, less items for your home, fewer toys. You're seeing some of the pressure in those categories. Now, those cycles are going to change, and you've been reporting about categories like toys, seeing pretty significant declines. But the other trend we are seeing, and we've seen really for several years now, is the American consumer is enjoying those seasonal moments, whether it's Halloween or the summer moments, going back to Mother's Day and Father's Day. They're still enjoying those moments, and they...
When he says enjoying those moments, he means that we have been propagandized into buying extra shit, even when we can't afford it. Even when we're on a fucking budget trying to nickel and dime. Morons go out and spend money on shit they don't need for fucking holidays. That is just capitalist crap that you're just going to throw away, or that's just going to sit out for 2 weeks and then get thrown away. So all of these corporations, they're like, yes, people are still seasonally spending money because we have influenced them, even when they're broke, to still spend money on these holiday bullshit things where they could be saving money for the groceries. And yes, I hate that crap even in my own home.
Keep looking for newness.
But what you're describing of sales of goods being down 7 quarters in a row, I mean, that's a goods recession. We see places in our economy where things look great. The GDP came back up 4.9% for the 3rd quarter. But what you're describing sounds like a recession in certain areas.
Our GDP is up because our GDP is leaning on bombs, because Halliburton and Raytheon are having great quarters. That's not an indication of an actual uptick for the American citizen.
Areas of the economy.
Becky, I think it's really fair. I think it's why it's so important not just to look at the top line, but to double click and say what's happening in different categories. What's the pressure of the last 3 or 4 years of rising costs doing to how Americans are budgeting each and every week? And what are they trading off? right now, again, for 7 quarters, they're buying fewer discretionary items, and they're not buying the goods that they were during the pandemic. Now, that will change over time, and we're certainly planning conservatively in those categories.
But your inventory is under much tighter controls and much tougher management than it had been during the pandemic, when you guys were basically trying to get your hands on anything you could because consumers were buying anything they could buy.
I mean, we had several years where we were just chasing demand. Well, you and I were meeting during those quarters, and we had comps that were up 10, 15, 20%, and it was driven by Americans who were buying all those discretionary items because they were at home, and they were entertaining their families, and they were decorating their homes and buying things for the outdoors and leaning into toys. Well, we knew that wasn't going to go on forever. We certainly had some inventory challenges that we addressed last year, and we've taken a much more conservative approach in planning inventory this year. But we're going to lean into those big seasonal moments and play to win when we know the consumer is looking for something that's new, looking for affordability, looking for that special item for the holiday season.
Let's talk about something that you have been on the forefront. Theft when it comes to the stores. You can call this shrinkage, you can call it whatever it is, but what it really is organized criminal theft rings that are coming through. This is affecting every retailer. I think it was $112 billion that it was assumed to cost retail overall last year. But you've been, I think, the most vocal critic of what's happening and saying that something needs to be done. We walk around the stores and you'll see that there are now signs that say you can't check out more than 10 items. You see some items that are locked behind glass and you have to wave your hand over to bring someone over to come get things open. You've taken a lot of steps to combat this, but where does the problem stand right now?
Yeah. Well, Becky, we felt...
One, we don't have any employees, so we're abstracting wealth in every way possible, and somehow people are stealing things from us because we don't really have any employees. We don't want to have any employees. We're not going to add any employees. So let's just put 1,000 freaking digital things around so you're watched everywhere and cameras are everywhere, but there's nobody watching the cameras because, again, we don't have any employees. We don't have security guards. We just call the cops on a regular basis because this is Target's freaking MO, right?
Felt the need to use our voice to elevate awareness around this topic at both the national level, at the state level, and the local level. And sitting here today, one, I feel really good about the progress that's being made. Big thanks to Matt Shea at NRF, Brian Dodge at RELA. We've elevated the conversation.
Awareness?
And I think we're starting to see real progress. The Inform Act, which was passed earlier this year,
you think
will make
we
it
give
much
two
more
shits about your
difficult for these
fucking
groups
corporate
to monetize the goods that they're
motherfucking
stealing by putting more focus on identifying yourself before you can sell in a marketplace. We're really pleased with how some of the local DAs have responded. In our team,
$112 billion in theft from all the retail chains, and they only make, they're not in the red. That's not putting them in the red. How about your stolen wages, paying your employees too little? The few employees you do have, you stress out. How about that?
Teams and other retail teams have actually been walking stores with local DAs to make sure they better
This guy hasn't done his own grocery shopping in his entire life. Fuck this guy.
understand the challenges we're facing.
DAs who weren't necessarily prosecuting some of these crimes before? Or
In the past.
So this is left up to them to say you've got to prosecute these things?
And make sure they understand the challenge. So when I started talking about this, we certainly talked about the overall financial impact. And you use the latest NRF number. It's a significant issue. But beyond the financial impact, I think there's a societal impact here. So you look at certain cities where stores have been closing. Those jobs go away. The tax dollars are gone. But importantly, that local consumer doesn't have access to the goods that they need. So that impacts everyone in that community. And I think as we've educated at the federal, state, and local level, here's the true impact. Yes, it's a financial issue. There's also a safety issue for our teams and the shoppers who are in a retail store when these gangs come in. But we're building awareness.
I mean, it's not just your voice. You've taken action. And I realize you're closing and opening stores all the time. But you made a move earlier this year to say that you were going to close, I think it was 9 stores in urban areas, to say we're closing these stores because we can't deal with the shoplifting and the theft that's going on here. And we don't feel like it's a safe place for our employees. That was a move you said you didn't want to make. But you were very vocal about doing it at the time and picking those stores. Why those stores? What happened there?
Well, they were stores where we'd made big investments in additional asset protection, working with third-party security. We had used other devices to try to control.
Third-party security. They pay for security surveillance. They pay for the cameras, and then they call the cops. They don't have any employees themselves.
Control theft. But we closed those stores because we deemed it wasn't safe for our teams to continue to operate in those environments. And it's really hard to make a decision to close a store. We like to open stores. We'll open up 20 new stores this year. We like to be opening stores and expanding our presence. But when we're not seeing the progress, when other stores are closing around us and our teams don't feel safe, we had no choice.
Gross, gross, gross.
And I want to give you sort of a picture of what that means for a child, for example, who's coming in with a majority of their body burned. That is
This is a Doctors Without Borders, their side of the clip, meaning that they have rights to themselves. And this is a Doctors Without Borders quick clip from CNN.
A very extremely exquisitely painful injury. And if you don't have adequate pain control for it, that child is going to suffer. If you don't have adequate dressings, you cannot appropriately clean for those wounds so that they remain clean. And if you don't have appropriate anesthetics, every single time you do the dressing changes, the child is going to wail in pain and is going to experience levels of pain that are completely inhumane. And I'm using the words of the doctors that are describing what they're having to do, having been completely stripped of all the tools of modern medicine to take care of these horrific injuries. They are saying it is humane, it is unbearable, it is intolerable. You know, the majority of the victims obviously are civilians, and the vast majority are women and children. And we keep listing these numbers, but they're not numbers. You know, 3,600 children at least that we've been able to count in the death toll. The rest are still trapped under the rubble, so they can't be counted in those figures. Over 1,000 of them trapped under the rubble. You're talking approximately 5,000 children killed. It sounds like a number that we become very desensitized to, but these are individuals with personalities and characters and favorite foods and dreams, and they're somebody's everything. Humanitarian aid is urgently needed, and that's everything from the painkillers and anesthetics that I just mentioned to the fuel that is needed to power the generators that are imminently going to stop running. When they stop running, that means no ventilators, no ventilators, patients who are dependent on life-supporting therapies that require electricity to die. It also means we cannot sanitize water. This is already happening. We cannot desalinate water. So civilians are dehydrated or are drinking unsanitary water. There's an acronym that was coined in Gaza in the last 3 weeks and has been used way too frequently, and it's WCNSF. It stands for Wounded Child, No Surviving Family. And it is unfortunately an acronym that should not exist in this day and age, and it should not exist in the world that I hope everyone watching your program wants to live in.
I don't even want to remember that.
First up, he is the Democratic.
That was absolutely disturbing. 2.5 minutes, that rocked me. All right, Jesus. Oh, I can't believe I put this on the list. You can hate me now and hate me later. I hate myself for it too. All right, Tool Bag Bill Maher with True Tool Bag Dean Phillips. Here we go. Why do we do ourselves?
Congressman from...
You should be embarrassed that our mainstream media has caused that, created that kind of callousness and apathy towards politics. You should be embarrassed. You are a political comedian. You should be ashamed that your show isn't engaging more young people. Your comedy political show is engaging more young people and bringing more people into the spectrum. You should be embarrassed, not applauding, you idiots. That is a horrible thing to say. Whitmer would be horrible. She is a corporate tool owned by the same people that own Republicans. She is a sliver different than Republicans. Stupid. Yeah, that was hilarious. You guys are both very funny people.
Lately, one way I've been able to help keep my mental health a priority has been through therapy using BetterHelp.
Okay.
After graduating college and now being a young adult, therapy is so beneficial so you can talk about the things going on in your life and have a life.
Let's push through.
Peace, family. Vicky Dillon here for African Diaspora News Channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to give us a big thumbs up, and share the broadcast. Thank you so very much, family. You solidify and strengthen our collective Black voice when you share our broadcast and you check out our website and our app and so forth. So for that, we want to say thank you so very much. Family, I, of course, have been discussing some of the inner workings of our government here in the United States, some of her activities, primarily covert activities that tend to take place around the world. Sometimes we're too busy living our own lives, focusing on the cares of life, taking care of our families, our loved ones, ourselves, our health, to really pay attention. And it is quite overwhelming because the average person wouldn't believe for one moment that someone would be so dedicated to being the ruler of the entire world, a true imperialist, in a covert and subtle way, but extraordinarily, effectively devastating in more ways than one. I was listening to quite a lengthy hearing from one of the from an arm of the U.S. Department of State, known as the GEC, the Global Engagement Center. They're discussing funding, their budgets and so forth, and they have to have these discussions before Congress. I want you to listen to a little bit of this excerpt from the hearing, a little bit of this exchange that took place between a congressman and one of the directors of this organization. Watch this.
Policies are intrinsically linked in an effort to try and go ahead and stop the expansion of the Belt and Road Initiative, which its entire intent is the Eurasian expansion, the domination of Africa, and to cut off Western Hemisphere supply chain from the Horn of Africa, Mediterranean, Red Sea, Black Sea, Persian Gulf to control those elements, utilize the WHO and the WEF and OPEC to attack the petrodollar and the US dollar as the global currency, while simultaneously utilizing their propaganda and misinformation campaigns in our own hemisphere to go after economic coercion and
seek to paint us as the villain in every situation, that seek to entirely misrepresent everything we stand for and everything they're doing. So, for example, on the Belt and Road Initiative, which the PRC presents as an economic boon to the partners, Global Engagement Center has supported work that shows definitively that the projects that they are funding are not what they're cracked up to be. We've translated that work into local languages. We've done it to make the case with decision-making elites to try to shape the...
Thanks for the follow, Crucified, for my opinions. I feel you there. I get crucified on here all the time. People come on here just to attack me for my name. So I feel you there. Cleaning up a little bit here. I feel you.
Environment in a direction that is accurate, that is true, and that is less conducive to the PRC.
Wow, family. I want you to listen to this. The Global Engagement Center, again, this is under the U.S. Department of State on the government website. Their mission is, listen, to direct, lead, synchronize, integrate, coordinate U.S. federal government efforts to recognize, understand, expose, and counter foreign state and non-state propaganda and disinformation efforts aimed at undermining or influencing the policies, security, or stability of the United States, its allies, and partner nations. This is a propaganda wing of the United States, essentially. That's how I'm describing it in layman's terms. You heard the congressman specifically say that China's Belt and Road Initiative.
What's in there? Cool.
Poopy doo! Poopy doo! Poopy doo!
Puppy.
In part is meant to dominate Africa. Family, you have been hearing all types of propaganda about China's loans being debt traps. And the people that you hear talking about that phrase the most is the United States and other white nations. Now, we both know that the WTO, the IMF, and other such financial trade institutions and entities have certainly robbed the African continent. How many times have you ever heard of the United States or the West calling themselves out for its utter theft and modern economic slavery of the continent of Africa?
Never.
This is not to absolve China of any and all possible wrongdoing. You all know we do coverage here, but I believe it's important to make a distinction between official policies that are pushed by the nation of China, the country of China, versus individual Chinese people and individual Chinese entities and businesses, which we, as you know, we give them that work when they're out of line.
All right. She's good. I like African Dysphoria News Channel. She got 12,000 views from 3 days ago. She's got 1.5 million followers. So yeah, good for her. Let's keep moving, though. Gotta keep on moving today. What the fuck?
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As the health ministry in Gaza says the death toll from Israel's bombardment of Gaza for the last month since October 7th, when Hamas attacked.
I still have more videos in my lineup. How do we do this? Let's go to Tom Hartman, huh? A couple more clips.
Do you know the U.S. solar company's nasty little...
Couple more clips before we move on. How to build an empire with Tom Hartman.
Said it. Amazon and Walmart are not treating their employees well, and the UN is not pleased. The UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights called on the CEOs of Amazon, Walmart, and DoorDash and the U.S. government to address allegations, this Michael Sainato over at The Guardian, to address allegations that the top U.S. corporations pay such low wages that they trap workers in poverty, forcing them to rely on government assistance programs to survive. I would argue that, you know, I get what the UN is saying here, you know, and that people are forced to go on government services because they just don't make enough money. I get that. I totally get it. But I would argue that the arrow of causation flows in the other direction. That it's not that people are getting such crap wages that they have to go get food stamps, but rather that the employers, knowing that food stamps are available, pay people crap wages, figuring that the food stamps are basically part of their compensation. And, you know, Section 8 housing and, you know, financial subsidies for education, for transportation, everything else, all these different government programs, what they do is they make it possible for these companies to pay crappy wages. Now, it's not real often that you hear a progressive saying, maybe we should be dialing back some of the federal government's programs. I mean, yes, was it yesterday, the day before, I did the whole thing about universal basic income. I think that was on Wednesday. You know, how good and important a thing that can be, and you know, all these studies coming out and show. And so, right, you know, let's just make sure that everybody has enough money to be above the poverty level, and you're not going to have, you know, children being damaged by childhood, basically, for example. But I also pointed out when I wrote that op-ed and in my rant here on this program that there's a bunch of different ways to make sure that people aren't in poverty. I mean, something like 90% of the people in many European countries have union benefit, are unionized. They have good pay. They don't need the kind of welfare benefits, as it were, that we provide to people here in the United States. I would argue that, I mean, you've got a dozen states now, all red states, that still have a minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. It hasn't gone up in
North Carolina.
Well, it's the longest period of a static minimum wage in the history of the United States. The minimum wage was put into law in 1935. And I would argue that those states are able to do that because they have welfare programs that are covering people that make that kind of low, those kind of low wages. Now they're always trying to cut those programs, but you know, it's like a subsidy, you know. So anyhow, the 2020 U.S. Government Accountability Office reported that Amazon and Walmart were listed among.
Is Voice Roy in the house? I just get your random resubscribes. Well, thank you for resubscribing. I'm back. Hey. Yeah. Been a while, right? Been a while. But yeah, I got through my summer with no internet up north and been back down here for a few weeks. I know I'm not hitting stuff regular, but I'm trying to get life back into a regular rhythm. Things keep happening, of course, I'm sure. I know I think you had a rough winter last year. You get it. Shit keeps happening, right?
The top 25 employers with workers relying on SNAP, on food stamps, and on Medicaid in 9 states studied, with Walmart ranked first and Amazon ranked 6th. This letter from the United Nations said,
and we're trying our asses off to go to World War III while all of our lives actually have real drama. While all of us have to deal with real drama in our lives, our government is trying to go to World War III with our fucking tax dollars everywhere. So, yeah, trying to stay vigilant while trying to keep your head above water. It's great stuff. Great stuff.
the concerns apply to many workers in the U.S., which relates to how the minimum wage is set in legislation, whether at federal or state level. Wage theft by employers, unpredictable yet inflexible work schedules, the sake of undocumented, I think they mean the state of undocumented workers, violation of union rights, and automation as, you know, some of the issues. But one of the main ones is the violation of union rights. And the problem is that, you know, since Republicans in Congress passed Taft-Hartley, and now pretty much every red state has become a right-to-work-for-less state with a...
Right to work for less. But yeah, no, I mean, we don't have union rights. Tom's not wrong. He's not going to mention that Biden's not doing anything for it. Maybe he'll say Biden's doing good or something, but Biden's screwed the unions over. So we are stuck in a low-wage country, no benefit country, where our tax dollars, $100 billion is going to another $100 billion. We give $3 billion a year to Israel every year. We give $2.5 billion a year to Colombia every year. People forget about that huge chunk of change that goes down to Colombia for some fucking reason. So yeah, we're just gouging money left and right, but we don't have anything. Our cities look like our ghettos look like third world nations. Our water is disgusting. And yeah, we're just still letting corporations run shit.
$7.25 minimum wage. You can't have unions in red states. You can't have a decent minimum wage in red states. You can't have a decent standard of living in red states. It's like we're doing this massive experiment to prove that Republicans' policies suck. And it's, in the process, you know, harming a lot of people. Walmart, by the way, is owned by the Walton family. They're the largest stockholders, the majority owners, in fact, of the company. This one family is worth $240 billion.
They never ask where the money's coming from when they give it to another country for war. When we sign those checks for Halliburton and Raytheon, they never ask where the money's coming. But as soon as we ask for a couple bucks for free college or free health care, it becomes the biggest debate ever.
$1 billion. But they can't pay their workers well, or they refuse to pay their workers well, which is in part why they're worth $240 billion. As of October 1st, there were 220 open or settled unfair labor practice charges against Amazon with the Department of Labor, with the National Labor Relations Board. Amazon reportedly spent more than $14.2 million on anti-union consultants last year. Italy and France cover 100% of workers, 100% in Italy, 98% in France by unions. 98% of all people in France have a union. 100% of people in Italy.
No wonder they're out striking all the time. They know they have their fucking jobs. They can go out and strike and protest. I shouldn't have said striking. They're out protesting all the time because they know they can come back to their jobs. Grab a drink. All good. Hey. My moderator, I think, is sleeping with the stream open, and we're just chilling tonight. All good. Get your drink.
Compared with 11% of workers in the United States. The minimum wage has been unchanged since 2009, and 20 states are using the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour.
North Carolina.
Workers with a high school diploma today make 2.7% less in real terms.
It's funny that the Bible Belt is okay with minimum wage being $7. All those states are in the Bible Belt.
Terms than they did in 1979, almost 50 years ago. I think it's time to say, hey, there's something wrong with this. This doesn't work. This is not a good idea.
All right. Nice and short clips. A die-in at a Raytheon compound in Tucson calls out the complicity of Gaza. Raytheon blood money. I have a Halliburton? What do we have down the road? I think it's a Halliburton that's down the road. But I love this. Unicorn Riot, thank you for showing. The sign in the back says, "End USA complicity in Israel's genocide, apartheid, and oppression of the Palestinian people. War and violence are not the answer. Free Palestine. Raytheon missiles deliver genocide. Raytheon blood is on your hands." And yeah, this is a die-in, a dead body fake count die-in in front of a Tucson Raytheon compound. We should be doing this everywhere. We should be, guilting these death merchants way harder than we do. This is a fantastic. I love what these guys are doing here. We breathe together. Dying in at Raytheon Missiles and Defense, Tucson, Arizona.
Together, we breathe together. Stop the occupation. We breathe, we breathe, we breathe together. We breathe together. We breathe together. We're here today.
She couldn't even get babysitters. She just brought her kids out like, hey, try to chill out and lay down on this hot ass Tucson ground. I mean, even this is done. I mean, they have long sleeves on there. Even though this was done a while ago, or recently, it's got to still be, I'm guessing Tucson's going to be hot as balls still. Like, it's pretty hot in Florida still. It's still in the 80s here in Florida, so they're probably in the 70s and 80s, sitting on pavement, which has got to be hotter than the 80, 85 degree pavement, blacktop. So this is taking some nerve from these people that go out there and protest. Good for these people. I love it. We should be in front of every one of these compounds.
In front of Raytheon, hosting a die-in in order to talk more about and bring awareness to and ultimately stand against the genocide that is going on against Palestinians in Gaza.
Oh, that's a pretty good crowd.
Genocide is happening with the green light of the U.S. and with Raytheon's full arming of that violence. So we know that Raytheon also funds border wall surveillance tech, and we know that our struggles with Gaza is actually stretched from Arizona to Palestine, and therefore our solidarity needs to be global as well.
Yeah, I was mentioning that earlier during one of the interviews. It is interesting how we were 3 months ago. We felt like we were going to go to World War. Like our tensions were just. I felt like my chest was about to explode. We were, looking at war in China, against China and Taiwan. We were looking at war against Russia and Ukraine, and all of NATO being over there, and then all of Asia being to war, and it was going to go crazy. And now we're looking at only the Middle East. Again. One more time. Hey, thank you for the follow. Hey, we're building. Thank you. Late night news. I'm a stoner, so hit that notification too. Yeah, please hit the notifications, guys. I am semi-regular. The weekend's more regular. The weekdays are hit and miss. I am a bartender. I will get my shit together soon. But yeah, it's crazy, right? Like, this war cycle... The news is so hyper-focused on things. You would think a 24/7 news cycle. These shows have 24 hours a day to cover the news, and we can't cover 3 different incursions. And then Vivek was talking about Armenia being invaded by Uzbekistan. I'm probably saying this wrong because I can't say all these freaking Asian governments as well as I should, but yeah, it's crazy. Absolutely crazy. I think this is just a warm-up.
Introducing Constitution 101. The National Constitution Center and Khan Academy are teaming up to offer students a...
So, I'm looking at a free online course for Constitution 101. I was thinking about doing this as like a weekly segment, doing a constitutional instructional video. I think I've done Khan videos here a lot, guys. This is something I've done before. for history lessons, for like lessons on monetary funds and stuff like that. But I thought maybe that'd be a fun like weekday clip, like a Tuesday night, Wednesday night thing where we do this. That's why I brought this here. I know it's only a minute discussion, but a constitutional 101. Like, let's learn the Constitution better so we can argue our facts better, right? Let's.
Free online course on the U.S. Constitution, led by conversations hosted by Jeffrey Rosen, President and CEO of the National Constitution Center, and Sal Khan, founder and CEO of Khan Academy, joined by dozens of constitutional scholars, professors, and experts from diverse political philosophies. Students will explore the Constitution's historical foundation.
I mean, this might be the biggest point. I am a nerd. I am a dork. This looks fun. This looks fun to me. We should do this, I think. What do you think?
Landmark Supreme Court cases and contemporary constitutional issues pioneered by the founders and diverse figures from across American history. The semester-long course will provide nonpartisan constitutional education to counter the civics crisis facing America, where civics achievement is at the same level as 1998. Students will gain knowledge to become engaged citizens and foster an understanding of diverse viewpoints. All of the videos, quizzes, and exercises will be designed to align with state curriculum standards nationwide. It's all on Khan Academy, and as always, it's free to anyone, anywhere. Khan
Academy. I support them. Check them out, guys. Yeah, I definitely actually support Khan Academy. They do straightforward stuff. I think it's pretty important. I think I'm going to start doing that as a segment. We'll set it up on the schedule. I am still looking for work, so it's hard for me to say what day of the week I want to do that on. But a Tuesday or a Wednesday is probably going to be my best nights. It's the nights I have the house to myself. It's a weeknight. Commercials.
Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. I'm Gina.
All right, live now from Fox. 3 days ago. Yeah, I think we're going to go ahead and go with that. 3 days ago, this was a huge thing, and I didn't see it on the mainstream media. I'm sure it hit some people's radars. It drives me nuts when the news is so saturated with one topic that something like this goes through the loop. So I found this clip. I'm like, what the hell? Why do I not know about this? And it drives me nuts when I don't know about stuff.
Francine, it's Saturday, November 4th. Let's get to some breaking news we've been following from overnight. This one there on your screen, out in Nepal. Helicopters and ground troops rushed to help people hurt in a strong earthquake that shook districts in northwestern Nepal just before midnight Friday. It killed at least 128 people and injured dozens more, according to officials at the Associated Press. Authorities saying the death toll is expected to rise, noting that communications were cut off in many places. At a regional hospital, more than 100 beds were made available, and teams of doctors stood by to help the injured. The United States Geological Survey saying the earthquake had a preliminary magnitude of 5.6 and occurred at a depth of 11 miles. Nepal's National Earthquake Monitoring and Research Center saying its epicenter was about 400 kilometers northeast of Nepal's capital. As day broke this morning, rescued helicopters could be seen flying into the region to help out with security forces on the ground as they digged out the injured and dead from the rubble. Troops were clearing roads and mountain trails that were blocked by landslides triggered by the earthquake. Helicopters flew in medical workers and medicines to the hospitals out there. Security officials are working with villagers all throughout the day and into the darkness, pulling the dead and injured from the fallen houses. Earthquakes are common in mountainous Nepal. A 7.8 magnitude earthquake back in 2015 killed some 9,000 people and damaged about 1 million structures. We do know at this time that neighboring India has offered to help in rescue efforts, as the Indian Prime Minister has shared on social media that he was deeply saddened by the loss of lives and damage due to that earthquake in Nepal. But on your screen, you can see the devastations. You see the roof completely off that building there, that one there on your screen torn in half.
Looks like a freaking war zone. That's horrible. It looks like a war zone. Another part of the planet just decimated. Ugh. It looks like a war zone. That is sad. All right. What the fuck? Oh, okay. That's weird. I just lost my... Oh. Interesting. I am suspended.